Hello, everybody. It's been a long and completely fascinating day. I am delighted to be here with you, the last session for the day. There's Monica. Hello, Monica. How are you?
I'm well. Hi, lovely to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We've had such a good discussion.
Yes.
And quite intense. I don't know how much of it you were able to catch.
I've been able to catch quite a bit, and I'm deeply moved. I think it was a very exciting day.
Oh,
Thank you.
I'm so pleased. And we're now also joined by Omar Silla. Hello.
Hi, Keisha. Hi, Monica. Long time.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Very, very well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we've been together, Omar and I, all day.
Yes, exactly.
Good morning.
It will not happen all the time, so we have to take advantage of that.
Exactly. It does make me itch to come to Kenya, though, or to come to wherever your offices are, because I think there's so much to continue to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in Kenya. Maybe after this, this week we can schedule.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. I'm in Kenya now. Yeah.
Great. Mm-hmm. We have an audience right now of 34 people, and I think quite a few more will come and join us, but I think we can start. Monica, this is your session. We had an apology, I'm afraid. From Celestine Kuala from Cote d'Ivoire. So this is a conversation between the three of us, but we will be in your hands, Monica. So can I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you so much. And once again, welcome everybody to the last session of what was a very intense day of brilliant ideas being shared, experiences being shared, and provocations being made. So I that this will be a good way to end the first day of the AUHF conference by thinking a little bit strategically about how, from a national government perspective, we could drive more intensively the achievement of the SDGs and what that means from a development perspective. So neither of you are government representatives, but never mind. I think you can imagine what it may be like to be a government official that is faced with the huge task of addressing the SDGs and simultaneously being very aware of this being real people that are affected by sustainable development challenges and the failure to achieve the SDGs, meaning that national development efforts fail. So it's not about a global agenda for the sake of a global agenda. It is a global agenda with a very local, very real impact at the household level, especially when it comes to our sector. SDG 11. Target 1, which is what the sector is most interested in. But clearly, as COVID-19 has shown, and as we've discussed already throughout the day, it's about so much more than a roof over your head. It is about now health outcomes being improved through adequate housing. It is about access to water. It is about gender equality. It is about redressing persistent poverty and inequality. It is about improving education outcomes. All of that can be affected by an adequate house in a good community. And so that's kind of where I want to place the two of you into that pound seat, so to speak, of a government official that has to make the decisions. So we know that in Africa, 250 million people are living in slums and informal settlements. That is about 60% of the urban population. These people are at the periphery of the urban framework due to poverty, but still crucial for our development. Countries around the world have had their development agenda focused on meeting the Sustainable Development Goals with the aim of ensuring equality and creating a better future for later generations. The first goal particularly is about ending poverty in all its forms. And poverty is often a defining characteristic of people living in informal settlements. The residents of these informal settlements are faced with vulnerabilities such as inadequate and unstable income, payment of high prices for necessities, inadequate protection of rights through the operation of law, etc. So SDG 11 is specifically on adequate housing and upgrading informal settlements and slums and addressing the shortfall in decent and affordable housing. And I would like to posit that it will be a major contribution to achieving the agenda as a whole, not only SDG 11. So that is the first provocation to maybe, Keisha, for you to just elaborate a little bit how you see adequate housing and affordable housing touching many aspects of development and not just adequate shelter.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we saw this right through the last 9 months when everybody was at home, and then with housing practitioners who are well housed, thought as they were looking at the inadequacies of their own homes, in fact, what must that mean for the markets that we're serving and for the much wider populations? And I think it was quite personal, actually, over the last 7 months to think about, and the way in which the House. At CAF, we've been framing it that there are issues of risk that come around the House. Its ability your ability to manage your risks has to do with the structure of your home, levels of overcrowding, levels of the air quality inside, and so on. And so in the context of COVID, that was significant. Then in the context of all of the other emergencies that people are facing, the quality of their housing has a profound impact on their ability to manage those risks. And then to be resilient to those risks also has to do with their relationship to their housing and to the land, and their ability to stake a claim in the city and to then operate. And so we can tie housing to all of the other sectors, and we've wrote about this as well, is that I think 14 of the SDGs, in fact, are realized through good housing. And it really must be central. As Omar said this morning, housing is at the center, and for the very basic reason that that's where we live. And so that's really where it happens. I'm just to broaden a little bit the question, take it a little bit further, is because when I think about the role of government and that, the thing that I am most struck by across the continent and in the conversations we've had this morning is that people are getting on with it. There are people, no matter how much or how little they earn, and critically how little they earn, that they're actually figuring out ways to meet their housing needs. And I think the most significant role for the state is to figure out where they are and help them from that spot, to bridge the gap. And then thinking about what is the role of the state in that process. And different governments have taken different approaches to doing that. And they are to varying degrees of engagement, also often depending on the wealth of the particular government. But I was just in the most fascinating panel about industrialized construction, and there are these private sector bodies there that are saying they know how to re-engineer the whole construction value chain. And they can do that and really get speed and quality and at a lower cost to very low income earners. And then it seems to me that the role of the state is to say, please, yes, go for it. And within regulate that, but enable it. And so the lever of the state is around its regulations and the way in which it enables the building process. And so on. let me stop there, because I'm sure that Omar has a lot of thoughts about this as well. And there's a lot of work that UN Habitat does in engaging specifically with governments around that. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, Omar, so what strategies, based on your observance of what Africa is doing to implement the SDGs, what strategies do you think are successful and why?
Thank you very much, Monica and Keisha, for kicking this conversation. I think, one point where it's very important as well to stress out, this cross-cutting nature of the issue of adequate housing. So I'm bringing again this point because I just realized that, this flooding that, Africa, West Africa has been facing, over the last months, where people have been kicked out of their houses because, of this flood. First, request for this population, it was just where to stay. So I think we should link as well with the climate change aspect, housing as a way of mitigating risk of climate change and others. So the most successful, interventions for me, let's look at first, the regional dimension, because there's something as well we need to really acknowledge at the continental level in Africa when it comes to this, to this plea for adequate and social housing. I think the African Union and UNHCR has played a key role, over the last 5 years on elevating, the role of urban development, also the place of housing within that. And I think this SDC 8 has played a key role. And if you remember, Africa was the only continent who managed to develop a common position for Habitat 3, with the facilitation of South Africa and Nigeria, which was quite a big achievement. And this is quite, a number of, political will coming together and a championship in Africa to really elevate the role of, of urbanization in Africa. And this has worked, a lot, because Africa was so bold during this negotiation, and many examples. But also, nationally speaking, I think there's quite a goodwill that we can assess. For example, if you look at that many African countries has put now in their agenda the issue of housing. Senegal now, they have this target of 100,000, housing. Kenya the same. And all these countries are asking question how best they can finance, this housing system. And they want even to establish some bank, housing bank in the model of Senegalese bank and others, experience. I think that's one area we need to look at as well. How we can bridge, the gap between country and between cities in Africa, in experience, in exchange some experience on the way that we are financing, the adequate housing. The second point of success for me is many African countries now are moving towards this national urban policy. Right now, I think the UN Habitat is supporting more than 20 countries in Africa developing national urban policy. It's quite a good opportunity for us to really, pitch on this important housing, not only as a vehicle for social equality, but also as a mean of, developing and promoting, development in cities, knowing that I think the number of ratio, on the development side come from the cities. And you mentioned it, Keisha, by referring to the value chain in the industrialization, which is another opportunity. I think those are some opportunities that have been open now at the policy level, and others as well are developing some strategy as well on the particular area. Of course, we shouldn't ignore some challenges, and most of the challenges for me, of course, I'm not talking about the financing system, but at least internally speaking, capacity related to these sectors. I think we are receiving as UN Habitat many requests, how we can build a capacity on this particular sector of housing, but also going beyond, the current perception of the housing, and that's where the role of the state is very important. I think so. For me, we have to be very realistic. Looking at the level of economy in Africa, the government cannot provide each household with one house or one unit. It's not possible at all. They don't have the budget. And I like the way you frame it, Keisha. It's more about looking at the enabling environment for people to go through, their own, process or their own buildings mechanism. But there are some prerequisites for that. One is regulatory framework. I think we need to look at the regulatory framework. And when it comes to regulatory framework, it's looking different categories. Of course, as I mentioned this morning, those that are getting, below this, this threshold of salary is not a problem for them. But me, when I'm speaking, it's more about this 42, living under the, the level of poverty in Africa. They don't have salaries. They don't have, they don't have pay slip. So they are just, vandal in the street, like those living in the informal settlement. And that's where the question should be. what the state should be doing, in creating incentive, but also some measures to assist those communities. I think that's where the challenge is. And I think so over the last day here in Kenya, we have very extensive discussion with European Union and European Investment Bank on the approach we should be looking into and how we can complement World Bank as well on their approach, which is purely private sector. And we have been thinking about it in different areas. One is promoting maybe job creation through this building materials. So how we can create, an industrialized system. From there, people can get salaries and start building their house. The third point was mainly looking into, owner-driven system. And for that as well, we need to look at the land dimension, how we can help those populations to secure their land right and to access to land right. From there, they can secure themselves. And I think there's some policy element that we need to look at it. And lastly, of course, it was a model of financing. And I think on that, we have some very successful experience on the financing, which should come from the informality. I think in West Africa, we are talking about the tontine. I don't know if you heard about it, the tontine, where people come together with their money, and at the end of the month, one woman can take it and start building housing. Those are some mechanisms that have been, experienced, and that the model that the SACCO is replicating, if you want, in Kenya, this kind of model. I think overall, I think there's some challenges. We are far of reaching the goal, but at least you can see the will. And as you mentioned, Monica, during your introduction, the whole question now is the starting point is the COVID-19, how we should approach things. I think that's where the question is, and that's where the discussion is, and how we can repurpose our policy, our regulatory framework to put into context, the purpose of adequate housing, where we are now. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that thought-provoking summary. I'm struck by again putting us all three of us into the shoes of a government official or a government representative. What both of you have been saying, I would say, is beyond the reach of my sphere of influence. So what are your thoughts around the partners, the relationships, who do we need to bring in, and how can we foster a better working relationship with the various partners? So the question is twofold. So who are the critical people that the fictional Monica, Minister of Housing, needs around the table, and then how do I make these partnerships work? So what are the critical factors there? Keisha, first you, and then Umar.
Thank you, Monica. That's so important. I really worry about how far apart the conversation is between the state and the private sector, or let me say the state and the non-state, because I'm going to broaden the private sector. I actually mean the non-state, because that includes the NGOs, it includes the SACCOs and the tontines, it includes households themselves who are building in their backyards. And the conversation is so far apart, and it is in South Africa, but it is actually in so many other places as well, about how do I, as a citizen, as a business, drive what I'm doing, and then the state, how do I regulate that and make sure that achieves my constitutional obligations, my moral, personal aspirations, all of that? Because I do think that we are unified in our ambition to target affordable housing and to realize the delivery of affordable housing. What I think has happened, at least in the last 10 years, 20 years or so on, it's all concertining for me these days, but what's happened in the last, certainly in the last 10 years, is that there's been remarkable transformation within the private sector and what the construction sector or the housing sector defines itself to be. There is enormous variety. And yet our policy frameworks are quite narrowly defined in terms of who those players would be. As Omar said, the nature of informality, the fact that much activity gets called informal just because we don't have the right systems to monitor and track it, or govern it in a way where actually what it's doing is delivering high quality, good housing. So I feel that as a government official, the reason that I am constrained, I'm pretending, but the reason I'm constrained for understanding that is that I think there's a trust issue, that I'm not aware of the breadth of activity that's happening, and there isn't a way to communicate that to me. So that's something that the AUHF is trying very hard to do, is to communicate the diversity of what a sector looks like. And then I do think that there's some attention really needs to be paid to empower me as an official to engage with this diversity, and that to then trust that if I deliver a piece of land, if I make sure that a piece of land is well regulated and available, that there will be the finance and the construction and the so on that will come into play, and that exists. Omar's point about the regulatory framework is critical because it needs to accommodate that diversity of players, and recognize, then we can sort of split out what are the roles of what the public sector will do and then the non-state sector. I'll stop there.
So clearly, broadening the pot of people that or actors that need to be involved in a conversation is number one, and number two is having an honest conversation about roles and responsibilities. Who's going to be in a position to do which parts of this big ambition that we're chasing? Thanks for that. Omar, would you like to add to that?
If I just make one little point, within that, the key issue is transparency and information, and to be able to communicate. And we have that opportunity that we can capture the information of what we're doing in the private sector side in a way that's understandable and embraceable by the government side. And I think that that's quite important. So the first thing that our minister should do would be to say, how can I amass the information I need to better engage with the reality of this sector? And who are the players that do that? And that, to me, otherwise what ends up happening is people climb on top of one another to get access to the minister, and it's who gets there first, rather than if everything is open and available for her to see, then she can apply her mind across that breadth.
Omar?
Yes, I think the stakeholders' analysis of this approach to adequate housing reveal, two paradigms. One which is horizontal and other which is vertical. Vertical in the sense that the national government has to closely collaborate with local government as well, especially in the context of devolution, decentralization, like Kenya. There's quite a number of discussion going on now on promoting the social housing at the county level. So it means some technical guidance from central government as well. I think if you listen to the conversation we have on Saturday on this, SDGs and secondary cities, what we learned from this COVID-19 now, this coordination, alignment with national and local government, how we can build on this success, from COVID-19 to make sure at least, there is guidance in terms of physical planning, because when you come talk about housing, as we described this morning, it's everything at the same time. It shouldn't be isolated. I think this is a first level of collaboration between national and local government, so that at least we have enabling environment even for private sector to come in. Because without this technical physical planning or all these prerequisites, in terms of access to land and others, it will be difficult to promote a private sector. On the horizontal element, of course, one key players that emerged now over the last 20 years, as mentioned by Keisha, is the private sector. Because before, if you look at the model of Senegal, Mali, and others, they used to have the government as promoting, all this social housing through the HLM, what they call the HLM, And now I think with this, opening of the economy, now we are bringing private sector, because the government cannot do everything. Of course, they don't have capitals, they don't have, sometimes the skills, and bringing private sector could be a good thing. And now you see emerging some model of financing. We are talking about blend financing, that bring, public-private sector cooperation, which is good for things. But again, for me, this is just dedicated to one category of the society. How to avoid this private sector, engagement in Africa in the house sector, create more inequalities. Because if you look at the model of Dakar, of Nairobi, where is Islam? Because you have rich communities and you have gated communities, next to the point. So how you can tap on this, added value, or on this, asset from the private sector to equalize society? That's the question I'm asking. Maybe the government need to take some incentive and get to see a model of distribution of revenue between these two categories of society. From there, people can, raise that element. The second point as well, and the stakeholders, community is very important for me as well. I think we need to look at the P4 now, private, public, people partnership. Because community, especially when it comes to resolving, this issue of informal settlement, of poverty at the particular level, they demonstrate their ability to contribute, really, by nature, even in kind. So we shouldn't ignore this contribution of this community, because we are dealing, as I mentioned this morning, 42% of the population. So how you can create those dynamic of communities, involving, but also being innovative with the guidance, of the government. I think that's something that we need to look at in the approach to the informal settlement. And lastly, one category which is very important, the African diaspora. I'm part of it as well, because we should not ignore this diaspora as well. Because if you go to all these big cities, Nigeria is a big house, people in the US. So how these people can contribute in a very productive manner to the economy. So I know many of them are doing rental system, building house to rent, but it's a way of contributing to the local economy with this remittance they are having. I think on this particular sector as well, there's something we can build on. With this remittance, how they can best use, because I always have this conversation with my team. I say, the African solidarity sometimes is not productive, economically productive. Socially, yes, because we keep the relationship, but economically, it's just for the consumption and not thinking about investment. I know many countries now are getting some measures and some policy for incentive for diaspora to invest or to have a quota, of, access to housing or kind of stuff. I think which is a good initiative. So I think those are some reflections I can give to you. Thank you very much. Back to you, Monica. Yeah.
Great. Before we do our last round, I'm just going to have a look over the chat. There's been some really great suggestions and questions in the chat. So give me a second to just read this properly. So Felician Komu is asking about the type of education that is required. It says education is reckoned to be the panacea of all of our problems, but which education? The informal sector have lessons for us to learn on how to solve their housing problems, the SACCOs, for example. I think we have touched on that in our conversation already. Our challenge is to determine the level of integrating their initiatives into the formal system. So that is, I think, a very important point to note. But I think that both Kesha and Omar would agree with you on that, Felician. Then Michael Mba says, I agree with Omar that it's difficult for African governments to provide housing for the entire populace. However, to achieve sustainable cities and settlements, are there strategies that local authorities can adopt to ensure that they eliminate slums without distorting the informal approach in housing development by poor households? Mm-hmm. And Kesha has responded there, but I will like to open it then up to both of you, Kesha and Omar, around affordability, providing housing without destroying the informal initiatives and the informal structures of communities that are being housed in many cases.
I think that I think it comes back to the same thing of needing to meet households, communities where they are, and then facilitate the gaps, because what they're doing is powerful capacity that we can't afford to waste. And so I've been so impressed, for example, about the SDI Know Your City movement, where they've been collecting data, Shekel International collecting data at a community level as a way to present what is happening at that very grassroots level to the regulatory space. Because I think it's quite difficult to get back to your very first question, Monica, that government official is sitting very far away from the experience of the household. And we need to find ways of connecting it. We've just gone through an exercise, my colleague, Alison Changana, together with Susan Carey, our editors of our yearbook, which we're launching tomorrow. And that's a yearbook that profiles housing sector across all countries in Africa. And I hope you all go and download it. But the effort to gather data for that, both from the public sector and from the private sector, is it's exhausting. It's definitely a labor of love. But very, very, that could be made easier. And if it was made easier, then it would create the basis for the regulators to understand the activities that people are making, in the efforts that people are making, both formal and informal, to understand that and incorporate that into their policy. And similarly so that the people who are working in informal settlements or in other contexts, if they had better understanding of what the state was doing and access to the data that the state is undoubtedly producing, even if not sharing, they might be more precise in their interventions. So I would just argue very strongly we need transparent action because that builds trust, it enables accountability, and it makes it possible to really build some ingenuity around the options. It's when we are ignorant of the opportunities that individual community groups have identified to solve their problems that we impose a mechanism on top to say, do it this way, and then we squash that ingenuity. We need to make it much more visible so that the players can see what resources they can draw on. Yeah.
Omar?
No, I mean, on capacity aspect, I think we may not finish the list if you really want to see what are the knowledge and capacity gap we have in this particular sector in Africa. So luckily now, I think we have a shift on the model of education, vocational training in Africa, because before the emphasis was more about the high level of education, PhD, master minimum, and small jobs. And people were always, learning from the informality, I have experience of my dad, and all my brothers just go one day and start learning how to do mechanic or how to do electricity or water pipe and others without formality, I think now this is something that the government is capturing because of the way of creating jobs as well, insertion for youth as well. But at the same time, look at in the level of planning, technician of planning we have in Africa. The ratio is so weak now. We have one planner for how many, 100 people, 200 million, 1,000 people, which is low on this particular area. There's a lot that need to be done. On the particular area as well of financing right now, because right now the whole discussion now is the finance for housing. What are the successful model? So we learned from this microcredit years ago, and I believe that there's quite a number of avenues we can explore. So I think how we can integrate this training, and that's the reason why maybe all this kind of excellence that we are establishing for housing could be able, to really fill the gap. So on the question, how we can promote, this model housing without distorting this informal system. We have concrete example, Dakar. I don't know, Monica, if you follow the example of Baraka in Dakar, which is in the middle of the center of Dakar, which was slums. And suddenly there was a deal between private sector, community, and the government to really regenerate this informal settlement and building modern building by you leveraging the value of land value capture, and the way that this private sector was remunerated himself is getting maybe the plot of land which is close to the street just have value can compensate the construction they do, and their way of modernizing the cities, because these people now have decent housing where they have toilet and modern and others, and the government of Senegal is replicating this model. And the PCP program even is trying to document this aspect. I think there's a lot of work going on now for me, coming back to your first question, Monica, is about looking what form of partnership, because this one was a tripartite partnership. Communities, as I mentioned it, government and private sector find, a modus operandi through which now access to land is possible for private sector for their own business speculation, while community can have, improve, living condition, including basic services and others. Maybe I think on the recommendation, we need to document all these, best practices as well, how people can be dealing with this normality. I think there's a lot we can learn from others' country, but also for me, the political will and the enabling framework is very important for this to happen. Over. Yes.
Thank you for that. Yeah, the political will, I think, is a key aspect, and I think that's where all of us have a very important role to play in advocacy, to continue to advocate for the centrality of housing in touching so much of every country's development agenda and the potential to really make a positive impact if handled correctly. And then also just picking up from some of the things in the chat, it's also about building trust, right? So the partnerships are about transparency, about allowing information to flow freely and to build trust, so that we can really have a true partnership, because a partnership without trust is a service level agreement actually. We have another 10 minutes or so to chat before the session ends. And I'm really, and I know I'm taxing both of you by making you stretch your imaginations at the end of the day, but I would like you to now imagine yourself in the role of a private sector. You can choose whichever type of company it could be, and to explain how you imagine this company, being your company, affecting the development agenda. So how are you achieving through your product or through your service the development agenda beyond the four walls and the roof of an adequate house? That would be my, I think, Keisha, I think you might be good at answering that question. And then Omar, I'm going to ask you a different question. So let's kick it off with Keisha first, to just imagine yourself to be any company you choose. Make one up.
Thank you. I do work for an NGO, so that might be dangerous. But I just wanted to make a quick comment on this question of trust as well, because I was quite amazed in the last 7 or 8 months. I think it's been that long in this country, in South Africa, where we are. Our Minister of Human Settlements engagement with a community of NGOs and community groups representing people living in informal settlements around the COVID-19 response. And every single Monday, there was a conversation among the community, and they reached a level of some sort of consensus to the extent that people with opinions can. And then they carried this to government. And it didn't always result in delight, but there was very good engagement. And I was astonished by that connection. And I think that is partly how you build trust. And it's recognizing that there are a diversity of players that extend beyond the formal sector. I'm going to be, my business is I'm going to build a backyard unit in my property, and I'm going to be a small scale landlord. That's what I'm going to be. And I am doing that because I live in a residential dormitory, and there isn't much economic activity, and I can't find a job anywhere. But I want to build. I want to build because I know that there are people who are in need of accommodation. There is some employment, and they're employed, and they can provide me with an income. But in order to do that, I need to be able to operate with my property that I'm living on and integrate with the local questions about the local authority. I need to find a touch point with the local authority, and I don't know who to go to, because I arrive at the local authority offices and the steps are very big. And I need to get my plans approved if I want to build something, and I won't get finance if I don't get my plans approved, and so on. I think it's so critical that our local authorities recognize that there are very many like me. And in fact, in South Africa, more housing is built by people building backyard rental than by the whole formal sector. It's just remarkable, and it happens under the radar. And our systems aren't designed to receive that. They're getting better, absolutely. And in some cities, there's a real responsiveness to this because it isn't going away. As I said, I was just in this conversation around industrialized construction, and there are some really interesting innovations coming from other private sectors to provide me, that small scale landlord, with access to quality building processes, to make sure that I build quality, and that when I build up, I do it straight and not to the side, and that people will be safe and comfortable and well protected in the units that I provide. There are financiers who are starting to recognize the legitimacy of my business, and the fact that when they give me a loan, it's not based on my current income, but on my future, which I will derive from renting that stock. And it is remarkable that there are companies like that are forming, that are recognizing me as a small business rather than as a homeowner. And so they're providing me a small business loan to become, lo and behold, a housing supplier. And me and all my neighbors, we're 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. And we're going to deliver more than the private sector does right now across the continent. But in order for us to be able to do that, we need the government to recognize us when we come to the steps of the building and say we want to submit our plans. We need a title deed in order to have a relationship with this land. I'm quite certain I want to pay my water and electricity bills, because in fact, my tenants won't pay me if I don't make sure that services are delivered to them. But that means I need a bill. And I need the municipality to give me that bill. And there is, I think, a huge opportunity for a recognition of small scale players like me. And I am seeing certainly the private sector developing its products, the formal private sector starting to develop its products to suit my inclination, which is just to sort something out on my property because I can't find a job. And we need the state to be equally responsive. Because it's true, my neighbor is perhaps not such a nice person, and they're not going to be the friendly landlord. There is some level of regulation that's really required, but it needs to be fit for purpose and to the nature of me as a person, as opposed to a fully fledged company. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. And Omar, you are going to just be an ordinary person, and you can describe to us how the Sustainable Development Agenda and all the SDGs that can be achieved through adequate housing and sustainable human settlements will affect you. In the next 10 years, all of the SDGs will be achieved, and what was Omar Silla's life as an ordinary person going to look like then?
I mean, I think there's many ways that people can contribute, in these SDGs without being in the UN system or without being in the NGO, in kind of, very formal settings. One avenue I will take, and I'm looking into this one as well, which is for me the basis on what we are talking about. If you talk about adequate housing, affordable housing, one issue is the land issues. So, and land issue is cross-cutting all these SDGs, and I think there's quite a a breakthrough, of getting this indicator 1.4.2, which is speaking to women and men in terms of ownership, internal security. But at the same time, when Keisha talk about trust, that's where I think the people are battling and killing each other. And now there's a suspicion, between communities, state, and others in many countries, because the way that, we are managing our land and bringing in, developers and private sector and everything, grabbing the land from communities. And one experience I had, I think I was so shocked by this. In 2015, when I visited Mali for an official mission, I had a chance to visit Kati. Kati is just, kind of, semi-rural area, just 10 kilometers from Bamako, where people start, sharing the land. And what was striking, people coming to get the land was from the municipality of Bamako, beyond, the territory, the boundary of Bamako. So it means that at the same time, they are encroaching in some territorial, which is out of their control. Those are kind of stuff that can, pull out people even to go to jihad or to take the boat. And somebody was telling me many young people have been living here. They took the boat to go to venture to clandestine, travel, and even those, many of them went to radicalism. I'm saying. I think you see as well. As you are coming back to the introduction of our discussion, how this housing is cross-cutting and touching upon many sectors, even in terms of security, in terms of radicalism. Now, if these people lose hope on their property, on their housing, what is the result? Is radicalism. And we shouldn't distance ourselves from what happened now in Nigeria and other countries in terms of, this political instability, because people want, better living conditions. And again, on this example of Senegal during the flooding, young people were the one who was out of the house to say, okay, guys, government, we want you to act quickly as possible to help us get houses and to get out of this, flood. So it means that I think beyond this, in terms of a contribution, I think there's a way we can support these communities in terms of knowledge, in terms of guidance as well. So I saw a good question, for example, in the chat, asking me what is my view on this investment from Akon, this, multi-millionaire, singers from Senegal now living in the US. Now he's creating a mega cities, in Senegal. But you have a question on these cities because you have to take into consideration the culture as a cultural dimension as well of community. You cannot put everything, in South Africa, in Johannesburg, or even in Kenya without taking into consideration, the culture and the belief of people as well, which is very important. Same here. For example, the resident coordinator here is promoting the 3D printing house here in Kenya, which is not really, which is quite absurd, what I'm saying. So that's why I'm saying, building this knowledge, sensitizing people, and there's another way we can make a difference and contribute to the SDG. This is my project. Just make sure at least land serves the purpose for everyone, and we have right policy and right dialogue around this question. Over.
Thank you so much. I think that this has been a really fun session, for me at least. I think we've really ended the day on a good note. I think what we have achieved through your help, Keisha, and is to really bring home the centrality of the sector, of this audience, be it construction companies, be it housing financiers, be it government officials at national or local level. Anybody that is operating in the housing value chain, of the centrality of affordable, adequate housing in touching the entire sustainable development agenda. I think if that's the one message that this conference can broadcast into the world, it will make a significant change in the mindset of decision makers in the private sector, as well as in government, around where to place the investment and how to think about making investments in our sector in such a way that we reap multiple fruits from multiple trees and not just the low-hanging ones. So I would like to thank both of you for really bringing all your wisdom into this last session of the day and sharing with empathy how important this conversation really is. I'm very grateful to you. So thanks very much. And thanks also to the great questions in the chat. And I look forward to a continuing conversation over the next few days with you all as an audience member.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Shia. Thank you very much. Let's be in touch, inshallah. I saw someone in the chat is saying Jerejef, which means thank you in Senegalese language.
It's nice. It's nice.
Jerejef. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you
Bye.
too.
Thank
you
you.
very much. Just a few little announcements before tomorrow. We have our session starts tomorrow at 10:30 South Africa time. So wherever you are in the world, work it out from that. But South Africa time, 10:30. We have David Dworkin from the National Housing Conference in the United States giving a presentation. And in fact, this is a really nice segue into that, because he will be focusing on the impact of housing on positive health, education, and economic outcomes. So, Monica, that becomes such an important thing for all of our housing ministers to take with them into account, to really sort of claim a bit of respect for what we're trying to achieve here, because in fact, it all is centrally in the home. For colleagues who are, I think tomorrow we go on with I think everybody has the session for how tomorrow, the session address for how tomorrow starts. There will be a new session, I think, on the next day where you're going to have to re-register, but we'll continue to communicate that. Anyone who has problems, you know where to find me. Just send me a WhatsApp or an email and I'll try and sort you out. Thank you so much. Nice first day.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Monica. That was really good.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody. Sleep well.
Thank you. Bye.